ones, and then it's like, well, what about the other benefits? What about the benefits to people if they're right by a city? We have, for example, on the Gold Coast, we have the Nerang National Park, which people still refer to as a forest because they don't even know that it's been upgraded to a national park. And to be honest, it is not of quality sufficient to be called a national park. But does it mean that we need to remove its protection and reallocate that somewhere else? But I don't know, because people are enjoying this. You know, it's right in the city, it's right on their doorstep, they know it, they've been there for decades, and I think there is value in that. So thinking about these problems, what about the benefits to people? Could we look at both? I sort of started talking to people, at Griffith University, and I met Ralph Buckley, who said, well, good, Ali, we've got this incredible data set, we've just collected it. It's a survey, and we asked people in Queensland and Victoria about their habits of park visitation, national parks and forests and things like that. And we asked them about their mental health using measures that are used by psychologists every day and other things. So we don't really know how to analyze this data. You're good with numbers and you're interested. How about you join us? Which was incredibly lucky for me. So it started a really productive and interesting collaboration. So, and it really kind of helped me to start thinking even more about this. As a conservationist, as a conservation scientist, you know, in the end, what I really would like is for the mental well-being benefits to individuals, to society, to be acknowledged, because it is underpinned by conservation funding. All the money that goes into maintaining these areas, it doesn't have to be a national park, but all of these green areas, you get actually measurable well-being benefits. We can even put a dollar value on them. So I would like this to be acknowledged so that we can leverage some of this back into maintaining these areas. So that's kind of my big evil plan, probably not evil, my big overarching kind of a goal here. You know, eventually, I would like Treasury to be happy with the valuation method and be happy to account for it and say, okay, well, these per billions of dollars, we can actually fund a little bit more of protection. But there's heaps of steps to go before that. So, you know, if between, hey, this national park is fantastic, I'm sure it's good for people, do you want to give us more money from public health? And actually this happening, we need to prove that it exists. We need to put a dollar value, using a method that Treasury is happy with. And then we need to do things like really understanding what it is, and what, in my opinion, that's what I'm interested in particular as well, what it is in the natural environment that gives that well-being a benefit. So more, you know, likely is not just one thing. So how much is the wildlife? You know, what is the value of good biodiversity, of native biodiversity, of different vegetation structures, things like that, landscapes, things that we don't really know at all. Once you go within nature, what is it that gives that benefit? The talk's not about that because we haven't done this work yet. I'm just telling you what's inside my head. All right, take-home messages. I like a talk that starts with take-home messages. So, and I hate outlines. So you're not getting an outline, you're getting take-home messages. And usually 3 is a good number, but I couldn't reduce them, so you get 4. Number 1 is that without parks, and by parks I mean national parks, forests, that kind of things, it becomes, how do you talk about something using word that is not jargon? So that's what I mean, like wildlife reserves and national parks and forests and things like that. Without parks, we could double the cost of mental health care in Australia. That's what our valuation method is saying right now. And this is pretty coarse valuation. You can ask me questions about this later. Treasury is not yet happy with it, but you got to start somewhere. The well-being benefits of nature-based activities, we found, can last for at least 3 months post-activity. This is a small pilot project, so you will see that, and we'll talk about caveats. But that's kind of a first step of thinking about how often people need to repeat the activity to maintain the benefits. Something that's also really close to my heart, and I'm sure Bill will understand because I've already talked a lot about these problems around equity and access and things. But there is a gap between those who do and don't go to these parks, those people that think of nature as theirs for recreation. And it's, as you'd expect, of course, linked to socioeconomic factors, but also other things like connection to nature. So there's also things that we've started to quantify, we can do more work on. And I think there is a missed opportunity for leveraging funding via mental health benefits, but this needs to be inclusive and equitable. If I remember, I can rant about privatization of national parks, creating more luxury accommodation to bring people into parks that are already going. They're already going, these people. So that's what I mean by being inclusive and equitable, thinking about that. Okay. So depending on the audience, and the audience here, I've got to be honest, I'm not sure how many health professionals are in there, but I'd like to start with a primer on mental ill health. I've moved away from mental health because when I'm writing grants, my grant funders don't like the idea that we're working on health. I talk a lot about mental well-being. So if you're wondering why the terms change, this is why I'm trying to use mental well-being instead. But really, we're talking about mental ill health from a psychology point of view, from when you go to therapy, if you've ever been, when you fill out questionnaires at the start that ask you if in the last 4 weeks, have you struggled to get out of bed, things like that. These are the questionnaires that are widely adopted worldwide by professionals. They use them on their patients, so there's heaps of data. And this is what we're talking about here. There's clinical mental ill health and non-clinical, different degrees. And then we've got a mental illness, which is a disorder that affects your life, makes you struggle from going to work and looking after your kids, and it affects your cognitive and emotional and social abilities. And an illness, and the mental health problems are kind of the same, but the illness is something that is recurring, maybe long-term, something you will have to live your whole life with, whereas a mental health problem is something more acute that may go away. But in the end, this is what we're talking about here. So I might be using the term well-being, again, because I've trained myself to use that for marketing purposes, but I'm talking about mental health here. And it is both expensive and pervasive, and these figures are from pre-COVID, so it's actually even worse now. But at the time, we knew that about 1 in 5 Australians suffer from mental ill health at any time. 1 in 5. And then in our lifetime, 1 in 2 of us will experience mental ill health, where, whether it's a long-term mental illness or whether it's mental health problems, it's highly pervasive, and this is very comparable worldwide. So if you look at other countries, and because you have a health system in many countries and they ask the same questions, this test, they're used everywhere, we know the percentage of people that are classified as clinically depressed, for example. So these figures, and again, I'm pretty sure they're actually worse now, but at a minimum, this is what we are seeing in Australia, and that's comparable in many places worldwide. And some people with mental ill health will seek treatment. So you go to your therapist, if you can afford it, you get therapy, hospital visits, and that's about $10 billion a year, roughly, probably a bit more now again. Things are very expensive. But there's also a lot of the cost of mental ill health that is not captured in that figure. So that's such as antisocial behavior, such as caring for somebody who has issues, and not seeking treatment. Not everybody can afford to seek treatment. So that figure is very conservative in terms of the cost to Australia of mental ill health. So, conservation scientists, we've got this environmental crisis, it's terrible, but you also have this mental health crisis. And I think we can actually really work on both at the same time. Because we know that being in nature is good for our health. I talked about this intuitive feeling that you have, and because often people, I think, will relate to that. It's like, yeah, I feel that, inside me. I know that being out in nature is good for me. We know that there's physical health-related benefits like lower blood pressure, lower heart rate, muscle tension, less stress hormones. I think physical benefits have been widely measured. And we have these mental health benefits that are starting to this is kind of an exploding area of research, more and more evidence, like improved attention and cognition and sleep, stress recovery, and that applies across all demographics and socioeconomic populations. Although, of course, accessing these, thinking of nature for that purpose is not distributed equally or equitably across everybody. So with this data that I was talking about and this collaboration, we were wondering how much this free contribution is really worth to society. You know, it's when the idea of ecosystem services, now we have this concept of mental health service, ecosystem service. How much is this actually worth? Could we put a dollar value on it? And I've mentioned I've done many years focusing mostly on protected areas, parks, again, marketing. And this here, you may or may not be familiar with this, but this is the distribution, the growth in area of protected area of any kind, split by what we call IUCN categories. They're categories for different level of protections for these areas. So you are very strict, like strict nature reserve and national parks. This will be the first three categories, 1A, 1B, and 2, which are your purples and dark blue. And then you have the, and we usually sometimes count 3 and 4, which are very specific categories as strict. And then you have your less strict protections, which is about multiple use. It is about both people and biodiversity, even though these protected areas are first and foremost for conservation. Some of them allow different use, recreation use, but they also allow a livelihood in some places. Okay, but the point of this graph is that over time, and this is Australia, obviously you will have recognized the different states, and this is true everywhere in the world, but I'm just showing Australia here. What's happened is that what we've been growing in this protected area network, which we're gonna keep growing because we are now aiming for a 30% target by 2030. So 30% of Australia under protection. And what's happening is that a lot of this is actually under what we call the less strict, not strict protection. So these parks that are for people, which is fantastic. We can have debates around is allowing mountain biking here and there bad, good? We can talk about the evidence. We can have debates about the damage people can do to these areas, but just I think it's good because it's bringing people in contact with nature. So all of these areas that are about sharing nature with people are growing. So when Australia is aiming, going to be like 30% protected by 2030, I guarantee you it's not going to be national parks and strict reserves. It's going to be giant areas that is multiple use, that people are allowed to use for different things. Again, not a bad thing as long as we know what it's for. So people are getting, hopefully, more contact with protected nature of some kind. So still some protection, okay? So we're not gonna bulldoze it for a new housing estate, hopefully. I'm gonna step away from talking about koalas and their habitats. I'm gonna get sucked in this. That happens. But in general, this is still areas that are being protected with native vegetation, and people are allowed to go there and use it. So fantastic. Okay, so this talk is about some of the work we've been doing, obviously, and things I'm interested in. So what are the mental health benefits of parks in Australia and how much it's worth to the economy, which I'm going to talk about. How long this benefit lasts, and because there's a lot of talk around nature-based therapy, which again, I'm not going too close to because of marketing for funders. As soon as you start talking about therapy, you're doing medical research. But there's a big interest in prescribing nature. It's done in the US, it's done in Canada, it's done in China, it's done in lots of places. It's been done for a few years. In Australia, we are lagging. GPs do not prescribe nature for your health. Psychologists do not take you into nature, or do not even tell you to go into nature. But we could. So the idea of how long this benefit lasts or how often do you have to go is all about dosage and duration and frequency. You start thinking about what do you need to kind of maintain good benefits. How can we get more people into nature? Again, something very close to my heart. I'm really interested in equity of access for people with disability, but for people from a different cultural background, different socioeconomic background, and because it is not something that everybody sees as an option. And of course, eventually, how can conservation leverage these benefits? And how can we deliver co-benefits for people and nature, which is my long-term plan. So I'm going to do 1, 2, 3 in this talk. I haven't solved all problems. So I mentioned that survey before, and it's such incredible data. Now, I wasn't there when it was designed. I got brought in later. So I did not have any choice on what questions were being asked. But it was a massive survey. It was quite expensive. And it asked so many questions to 20,000 people in Queensland and Victoria. It's not equal Queensland and Victoria because Queensland put a lot less money in the work than Victoria, so they got a bigger sample, in case you're wondering. But if you weren't, I'm telling you. But anyway, so we have probably 2/3 Victorians and 1/3 Queenslanders. But it doesn't really make a difference in this case, in case you were wondering. And then does Queensland and Victoria represent the rest of Australia? Well, I mean, again, not a question I'm asking. We can debate that later. Okay, so they were asked lots of questions, including their use of national parks, forests, reserves, things like that. It was well defined, okay, in the last 12 months and also in their lifetime. So there's heaps of data. A lot of it will be rubbish because it's recall, okay? And maybe if we had a sample of 500,000, a million, whatever, it'd be a bit better. So some of it may or may not actually represent the truth, but this is the best you can get. As an aside, I once saw one of you talk, Bill, and you said this is bad data, which is best available data, and I love this, and I use it still. And so best available data for this. But also things like age and sex and marital status and employment status and their income and their education and their physical health and so many things. Things that impact your mental health, okay, as an individual. Because the idea is to still find a signal for use of national parks, given controlling for everything that might affect, might make mental health differ between individuals. Okay. So heaps of questions around who these people are. Questions around productivity, in particular productivity in the sense of mental health, which is called presenteeism, which is when you come to work, are you sitting at your desk scrolling Facebook instead of working? That's presenteeism. You are here, you're recorded at work, but you're not doing any work. And that's a sign of poor mental health. We all do it, and usually it's a big sign that I need to take a break. But we ask people about this. And so when I talk about productivity, I actually talk about an indirect measure of mental well-being, mental health. And mental health, direct mental health measured with well-known psychometric tests. So those that are used by psychologists, as I mentioned, if you go into therapy, you're often asked to fill out this questionnaires every 4 weeks or whatever, to measure if you've improved. And so that was included because this collaboration includes psychologists as well. Now, I love anecdotes, sorry, 4:30, you can kick me out. I spent 3 years teaching conservation biology, and I have a whole week on why this kind of scoring methods are a terrible representation of the truth. But that's what psychologists use. So I gotta, okay, this is best available data, and it is used so widely, and that I guess it has some value. So I feel like a major hypocrite whenever I use these, because I'm like, does it really, if I score this, am I really depressed? But it's used on millions of people. It's used all the time. So I guess that really does help a little bit, because you have such a big a baseline for things, at least, It's rubbish, but it's rubbish everywhere because you ask the same test to everyone. Okay, sorry for offending psychologists that are watching. And one of these measures is called Personal Wellbeing Index, PWI, which is a standard measure of quality of life, which is what we used, quality of life, which is what we've used for our first economic valuation. Treasury doesn't like that. Okay, it's too no, it's too wishy-washy. But anyway, you gotta start somewhere. So survey people about all of these things, who they are, and their park visits, and then do some stats that try to look for the signal of improvement in personal well-being as a function of park visits, given who you are, so controlling for socioeconomic and demographic variables, which I think is what makes this analysis powerful. And transform that into a dollar value. Okay. I love this figure. This is what I call an Alice special because I designed this and I have to explain it every time, and I have multiple versions of that. So let me just help you. On the x-axis, what you have is % of the population. And so the color is kind of just there for reinforcing the story, which is probably a really bad data visualization. And on the y-axis, you've got % improvement in personal well-being. And what it's showing you is not the improvement in personal well-being given a certain number of park visits per year. So 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on and so forth. You see that. But also, and this is why I've got this x-axis, the width of the bin tells you the percentage of the population that actually visits never once, right, in the data. So it's like a 3-dimensional thing. So once you've wrapped your head around this, what we're seeing is that, yeah, we've given controlling for everything. We find an increase in personal well-being, which is that measure, that psychometric test, that measure that psychologists use. The more you visit parks in the past 12 months, okay, great. So that's significant given controlling for everything. And we see that most people don't go more than 5 times, right? That's about, 85% of the sample. And this is actually truncated to 52. Some people reported going like 300 times. So we remove them from the sample because that seems like a lot of park visits, right? But maybe you walk through it when you go to work, I don't know. So, so we limited it to 1 per week maximum. So that's still probably about, when you removed everything, I'd say 16,000 people, sometimes you have to call weird answers. We don't have time for this. But anyway, so you see that, most people, there's 30% of people that never go to parks. Well, don't go in the last 12 months. A lot of people go once, twice, and then after that, even though the more you go, the more benefits you get. And so we took this and very coarse analysis, correlative statistical model, and we used this quality of life, or which is a measure of a quality adjusted life years, or QALY, if anybody's heard that, which is a dollar value on this improvement in quality of life. It's often described as how much a person is willing for another year, or willing to pay for another year of perfect health. In Australia, it's about $200,000, by the way. People are not asked to pay this. Willingness to pay is just a figure you pluck out of a survey. But again, widely used. QALY, dollar per QALY, widely used. It's a very often used economic tool. So again, we did not just make that up. But we combine very well-used psychometric tests and very well-used health economics methods. And we came up with this figure, which is, you're allowed to not believe, it's not very accurate, but we think that parks contribute 100 billion Australian dollars in Australia only. We're talking about trillions for the world. And that's between $5,000 and $10,000 per person per year, depending on who you include in this ratio. And so, in 2019, we estimated $6 trillion per year worldwide, that's US in this case, because why not mix currency, for mental health services. Okay, so you're really talking about these big figures, that are in the big league with actually the traditional ecosystem services. It's a lot of money that we're not accounting for. And even if it's not that much money, it's still a lot of money. And we then separated people from people that suffer from what we call clinically diagnosed mental ill health. So they kind of score a certain number on one of the scales. People that don't. So we've got mentally healthy and mentally unhealthy, and this is probably a terrible term to use. But in this case, and it's fun again, the same design, Ali special figure, so you don't have to squint at it. It's the same thing. It's improvement in personal well-being, depending on how many times you visit parks in the last 12 months, with the percentage of people that responded. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Color is just there for decoration, but I like a bit of color. And what we see, which is really interesting and really important, is that mentally unhealthy people, so those people that score high on, they're clinically depressed, so they're really struggling, actually get a lot more benefit according to our data. Okay, so now you can think about things like therapy, therapeutic effect of nature. You can start really making an argument for prescribing nature. Okay, so I've been obviously talking about this direct measure of mental health, and I mentioned we also did indirect measure of mental health, which is called workplace productivity. Whenever I talk about productivity, again, I want to say that I'm not talking about things like how many boxes you can close, when you shift or whatever, like not typical productivity. I'm talking about presenteeism, which is your ability to do your job when you're there and not just space out, not just be on Facebook, which shows my age, whatever, social media. We will do that because it's normal. You can't be on all the time, but there's a point where sometimes you're struggling. You're really struggling to focus on your work, and that's presenteeism. You're there, but you're not really being productive. And we found that people that visit parks at least once a month actually can up their productivity by 11%. Okay, and nationally, that means that these parks, these natural areas that are basically designated for conservation, give us a productivity gain of 1.8% and cut healthcare costs by 0.6%, which doesn't sound like a lot, but healthcare costs is very expensive. And of course, I just mentioned that people that are struggling, which are clinically diagnosed with a mental illness, actually get a lot more from nature than people that are not. People that are struggling still, that's fine, but not clinically diagnosed. Okay, so I'm not saying, just what the caveat I put in here, I'm not saying go to nature so you can be more productive for your employer. Okay, that is not what I'm saying. But the ability to do your job is what allows you to keep your job. It allows you to feed your children. It allows you to buy bread and milk and fuel and keep your job, right? So it's important that your mental health is good, because if your mental health crumbles, everything else crumbles. Okay, so productivity is kind of it's an argument, of course, when you come back to this economic valuation. Oh, look, it's important to it's worth a lot of money. It is, but deep down, it's really about individual benefits and the ability to keep living your life, because mental health is so important. Okay. Just as an aside, I'm not saying go to nature to make more money for your employer. That's not what I'm saying. Although you are making more money for your employer, as well, as Ralph has pointed out before. He didn't quite see it the same way. But so, fantastic, right? But that's super correlative. I said we asked people how many times you visited parks in the last 12 months. How many times you visited parks in your lifetime. And then recall how it's like a bit of recall, and it's not so good as an actual measure of things, how it's ongoing. So it's a correlation, but not necessarily a causation. You're like, okay, you found this improvement, but really, what's the proof that it's actually this visit to parks? You don't have the model to say that. Okay, yes, that is true. But to be able to look at causation, you need to do what we call repeated measures of the same people. So you need to take a person and ask them the same question over and over again. You need to, if possible, do a control and treatment experiment when you have people that nothing happens to them and people that do something and you measure the difference. You need some actual, basically an experiment to be able to do that, which is super expensive, of course, to do and pretty hard. But very lucky for us, we have this partner, Coastrek, which is an outdoor adventure social enterprise. It's mostly for women, which I'll talk about this in a minute. But basically, they organize these fundraising events where people, mostly women, sign up in teams of 4 to train and do a big walk, like 60K or whatever. There's different distances, but a really long walk by your average person standard, and fundraise at the same time. So it's the idea is to keep people accountable because they're part of a team and they're raising money for a really good cause. Okay. Co-Strike, so that's what they do. And now they are supporting the HAP Foundation. But at the time, they were giving money to Beyond Blue. Not that it matters in this case, because fundraising is fundraising, but just so you know, it kind of changed. Okay, so fantastic. The, I don't know what you call her, director, CEO of Co-Strike, Dai, just gave us access to participants in one of the upcoming events. And their social, so we're able to advertise the survey and find both a control and a treatment population. Okay, it is mostly women, okay, and it's mostly women that have kids, okay, and we worked with the Melbourne cohort, so you will probably think that it's probably a wealthy women that have kids is probably the cohort that we looked at here. Now, in general, you think that's a bad thing because that kind of really biases the results, but we actually have a very small sample size. So what it allows us to do is to have some homogeneity in some of the things. So we don't need to ask about as many things because the population is a lot more homogeneous than the regular Australian population, right? It's mostly women and mostly, I'd expect wealthy. We didn't really ask about this, and they mostly have children, so this is kind of a representation, whatever. But we'll plot who's partnered, who's single, who has kids, who doesn't. And we have a control and a treatment group. So we recruited just almost 400 people. My mental math isn't great. And out of these people, some of them signed up to do the event, so what we call Co-Strike event, Melbourne 2022. So they signed up to do the training, do the event, okay? And then we have people that were past participants at a different time, were potential future participants, so they haven't signed up yet. So these people were not doing the event, okay? And that's how we got a control group. So fairly homogeneous, which is a good thing when you have such a small sample size. And of course, it's kind of a pilot project because Co-Strike gave us access to this for free. And they offered to give a free registration to the people that complete the surveys, 3 surveys in this case, for the next time. So it cost them something, but also it was such a great opportunity. Okay, so we did 3 surveys 12 weeks before the event when they sign up. They sign up and we send them a survey and we ask them, what's your baseline? You know, what's your baseline? Who are you? What's your mental well-being? Okay. And then 12 weeks later, they do the event. And just after that, we survey them again and we ask them about their mental well-being. We ask them about their training habits. We'll talk about that in a second. And then 12 weeks after that, which is your fade out. Okay. Try to see how long the effect lasts, if any. We were really hoping to find an effect here. Okay. So one thing is that, sorry, before I move on to this, I would have loved to ask them 200 questions like we did with the other survey, but that just was not possible. Co-Strike did not want us to assault their participants with a massive survey for very little. So we had to be really strategic, again, which is why it comes in handy that it's a very homogeneous population. Mothers, women, you know, they already have a lot in common here. Okay, so results in a nutshell. This is, like I said, I just got feedback from the general. I actually did not look at it, but I think it's not too bad. So you get a pre-revision results. But anyway, so please don't share this. But we did find that our control group did not show any change in their personal well-being measures between the 3 surveys. So it was basically a flat line. And then, on the other hand, our treatment group showed a significant increase in well-being, in personal well-being, right after the event, and then a decrease 12 weeks later with a little residual benefit. So the decrease wasn't quite as much as the increase. So even 12 weeks later, there was still a little marginal benefit on their well-being, which to be explored further, but this is just it's quite rare to see these control, before-after control impact experiments because they are so expensive. So this is great evidence of an effect of this program. Things that mediated this, the training, if you trained more per week, you got a bigger benefit. If you trained in a group rather than alone, you got a better benefit. And so that was important. That's important for CoStrike because that's what they're doing. That's their leverage, social leverage to get these women into these programs because they're trying to do good here. They're not for profit. And so we did quantify the scale, duration, and economic value of these mental health benefits. So I have a dollar value using the same method for this, kind of at the individual scale. And you see a big difference, the individual benefits from like $500 to $2,000, depending on how much you trained and if you were training in a group or not. So there's a very big importance for these social levers, these things that kind of set you up for success. And so CoStrike really that's interesting, right? Because it proves that what they're doing, what they're trying to get these people, these women to do, which is train more in a group, actually works. It makes a difference in the well-being benefits. So from a therapy design perspective, almost done, I promise. From a therapy design perspective, the 12-week CoStrike program achieved sustained behavior change. It made a difference. It is working. It is a small-scale project, okay? But that's first evidence for some of the things they're doing, and it's great evidence using this control treatment design that there is a well-being benefits of that nature. So probably should have said that. It's outside. They go out in the national park. Second of an important thing to forget to mention. So this program, this walk in national park is very important. Of course, we observed a decline post-program. Okay, so things we can take on, for example, is that those nature therapy programs should include a goal or a purpose. A nature and a social and activity components are important. And people will, often ask questions around, but isn't it the physical activity? Yes, plenty of evidence that the physical activity is important, but it is not just that. Okay, from a park management perspective, some people might cringe at the idea that we're gonna get cohorts of people at the same time trampling through national parks to get their mental health well-being. Fair enough, high volume, high intensity events inside a protected area can be a bit daunting. So it's really about working together, I think, but also, again, flow-on benefits. If national parks are doing this, they should receive something, they should help plan, obviously, the event, but also receive something to help improve, protect, manage. And for CoStrike itself, they did work with National Park Services, which is fantastic. And they really want to scale up this. So they do multiple events all over Australia, and it's growing all the time. And they're really open to co-benefits. Okay, finally, it's towards the end of this presentation, I promise. So who wouldn't want free mental well-being benefits? As I've showed before, about 30% of Australians, Queensland and Victorians, but okay, let's pretend they represent the rest of Australia, haven't gone to a park in the last 12 months, okay? If you dig a bit deeper in the data, people that report never going is less than 30%, of course. But still, nothing in the last 12 months is important because, it might work for 3 months, but what next? Okay, so why don't people think of nature as theirs for recreation, for many reasons? So they're not even going to think about parks for their well-being. And of course, there's barriers, transport issues, we know that. No time or money. While it's free to go into a lot of national parks, there's a small investment cost. I mean, it looks small to me. Okay, it's not small to everybody. Buy the right shoes or a backpack or whatever. These things cost money. Not everybody can afford that. And they might not put a priority on it, right? If they don't think of nature as something that gives them anything. People with disability don't have access. And of course, we're talking here about physical disability, but also things like neurodiversity. Okay, which is just starting to explore this. Like, how do we get people that are non-typical into parks and use these services? But there's also fear. I love this. I always hear that. Well, I think people are scared. I'm like, are they? And then when I talk about birds and very educated people are like, I'm terrified of birds. It's fear, okay? I get that. It's important, but we don't know. Is it just fear? Can you overcome this fear? What about these people? Can we overcome that fear? Can we show them that you can overcome it? Or is it the personality? Can you do nothing? I don't know. I would like to do a study on this. So ARC, please fund me. Cultural background is so important, the cultural background. We have so many culturally diverse people in Australia. Like, if you think about, if I go to Nepal and I tell the people, please go out in national parks to get your mental health benefits, there's tigers there, okay? So it's not a really great advice. I wouldn't go myself and be face to face with a tiger that might eat me or my children. So the cultural background, where you come from, your childhood, but also intergenerational things, and it matters. And we don't know, okay? We don't know how much it affects this. So I'm gonna skip through the method, but I went back to this 20,000 respondents survey, and I split them into people that are ongoing visitors, past visitors, so they didn't go in the last 12 months, but they've gone in the past, new visitors, people that just started going recently, and people that have never been. And I use factor analysis, which is a kind of PCA, again, does not matter, to look for patterns in what makes these people different from each other. And didn't ask about disability, didn't ask about fear, okay, so this is ongoing, wonderful work. But things that I thought was interesting, so I don't have time to go through all of these in detail, so again, it's not even submitted. But I love these figures. But in short, there's some socio-demographic drivers of park visitation, of course. If you are more wealthy, if you have a higher education, so high income, high education, things that you're more likely to go to parks. Okay, that we know that, and you can think of many reasons why. And people who never visit parks are more likely to have low education, to not exercise, and to have low income. So some of the patterns emerging here, which is really bad form. I'm going to skip explaining this figure, but I'm really pushing it for time. So believe me. Believe me. Take me at my word. So what was really interesting is we asked about connection to nature. We designed a nature experience questionnaire, which is about connection to nature. And what we found is that the more connected to nature people are, so they report, getting different things from nature, the more likely they are to visit park recently or be a past visitor. So they haven't gone recently, but they used to go. And also, they're most likely to be a new visitor compared to never. So it's definitely things that are emerging, drivers of becoming a new visitor to parks or being an ongoing visitor. And mental health measures are a strong driver of new visitation. So both having really great mental health and really poor mental health, so you're talking about these extremes here, actually drives the likelihood of being a new visitor, which is, we need to unpack this, but it's interesting. So people that are really report both having really great well-being, personal well-being, and really poor, clinically diagnosed mental health, both tend to, this is a predictor of becoming a new visitor. Okay. And last thing, highest education level was important to distinguish between never and past visitors. So people that used to go and people that have never been, but not never and new. And that kind of provides evidence for the importance of your lifetime experience on past behavior, but not necessarily the ability to trigger new behavior. Again, very flimsy evidence, but this is what's emerging from this, and I find this really fascinating, as you probably can tell. So the work, I'm really interested in ongoing work on potential levers. How can we get more people into park? These 30% that don't go, and no, the answer is not creating more luxury accommodation in national parks. It's not that, because the people that will go there are already going into national park. Rent. And there's heaps to do on cultural gap. Like I've said, your cultural background is so important, and most of the work is done Australia, UK, US. Certain type of people, not people that live with tigers in the local national park. In fact, tigers are protected there because the aim is to double their numbers, and it's been achieved in the last 10 years, okay? I mean, I don't know about you, but I don't want to come face to face with a tiger, even though I am a conservation scientist. I do not want to be eaten by a tiger. Well, there's lots of people that want to be eaten by tigers here, clearly. Not moved by this. As a reason. So we need to think about how to make this culturally appropriate, and do work internationally in places with people that are not from Australia, the UK, or the US. And I've already talked about privatization of park. It's great, but it's not going to bring new people there. In fact, it's not great because it damages the environment. Okay. So let's keep parks for everyone, because for many reasons. First, the more people go, the more the benefits are trickling to individual ability to keep your work and be productive at work, and to society. Okay, it makes no sense to exclude people from the return on investment principle. From a policy perspective, health services have a really strong political influence. Politicians care more about health than environment. I don't know why. But so this ecosystem service value, if we can make it fit what decision makers are expecting, will have such a strong political power. And I think it actually has a chance to connect people, individual, their fitness, and by fitness I mean their ability to raise their kids. That's what I mean by fitness, not health, not going to the gym. We can connect that to the environment, which is what we're missing right now. We have people, and we have the environment, and we have facts, and nothing's being done. And so my hope is that perhaps we could connect individual fitness, your ability to feed your kids, stay alive, keep your job, to protecting the environment. I need a soapbox. All right, this is it. That's it. All right. Thanks, everyone, for listening to me. I don't know if we have time for questions. That's what happens when you let me rant about things.
Do you mind just ask if there's any questions online?
Yes. Do we know? Do they unmute themselves?
Any questions online, folks? Oh, while they're thinking about it.
Hi, Ali. So I'm Susan Lawrence, and I'm a lecturer here at JCU. And I guess I had one with an observation. And I wonder, because we're in a rural area, if we see sort of slightly different patterns. I teach field ecology, and I've also had students from ANU come up, and I've taught courses. And what I find is that the students from Cairns, my rural JCU students, they just jump to go in the bush. Like, they just feel very natural, and they don't ask permission. Whereas the students that we had from ANU, when they were visiting, they were much more hesitant to sort of just walk on.
Yeah.
And a lot of them had travelled the world, but they were really not very comfortable in sort of, I thought that must have been just sort of a bit of an example between rural and urban
It's
people.
funny, because usually I expect that the opposite comment is that you will find that people that live in rural area are actually sometimes less connected to the environment from this conservation point of view. So it's kind of an interesting point of view. And observation, like I said, I was telling Bill again, I grew up in France, further away from any coastline, and I didn't know what a national park was until I was an adult. So my relationship to the environment is probably quite different from a kid that grew up on the Gold Coast. And so this idea that childhood and your peers and where you live influences this connection it's obvious, but we don't know how yet. So I would love to do more work on this.
Well, and I guess students in environmental science degrees are probably a very biased.
That's right, exactly, yeah.
And so the next thing, and this is sort of a personal, parks are for everyone, but I have to say I was recently hiking in Tassie, and those trail runners are so annoying.
I thought you were a mountain biker.
You've got to get out of their way, because they want to gallop all the way to the end and gallop all the way back. Yeah. And you're like, well, here I am appreciating nature, and you're just running. Stop. So I'm a little conflicted about
No,
the parks
I get that. I feel the same way when I'm trying to be in silence and there's people chatting, and I'm like, could you just sit and take pictures? No, I get that, but I think it's very important to get as many people. Those trail runners would already be that wealthy category of people, so it's not the people that we need to bring into the parks.
Thanks, Ali. That was really interesting. I was just wondering, in all the data and studies you went through, could you tell the health benefit that people got from going to parks? Would that differ if people have more contact with green things, like having a garden, for example?
That's a great question, and an obvious question. So I didn't talk about that. Didn't have time. We did include questions around urban green spaces as well as national parks. So you're more not your forest, your local park. So not gardens, that wasn't there, but your local. I guess if you live in a city you guys probably like saw parks around here. But, you know, imagine a city like Melbourne or whatever. And we found that there was an effect, but it was actually much smaller than national parks. So actually we have evidence, you know, giving all caveats, that these parks are giving more benefits, which is why we want to look more into why. What is it about them? Because we don't know why, you know. We can, as a conservation scientist, I can tell you it's biodiversity, it's, we don't know. So, yeah.
Questions?
Hi, Fiona Ryan, sort of itinerant environmentalist. And so I was interested, people talk about climate change and how that's having a mental health, particularly on the young people. Are they using similar methodologies to you to calculate that? I mean,
you know, I am not sure that it's been done yet. I'm not, you know, because it's such an exploding area, I'm sure somebody thought of it. But the answer is I haven't seen anything that does the same thing. That doesn't mean somebody's not doing it. In terms of, I find that sometimes the climate change issue tends to be a lot more social science, not, you know, as in talking to people, focus group and same thing, and therefore it's not quite this method. So the answer is I haven't seen that. But I think it is all related, like thinking about young people in particular, which we haven't done. It's a whole, you know, kind of something else, different demographics. I haven't even looked at youth. Yeah.
Anybody else? Question? I've got one, Allie. Interesting talk, thanks very much. You know, as conservationists, we keep getting told, one of the lessons that's really being talked about a lot now, people like Nancy Knowlton at the Smithsonian and other people, is that we're turning people off with the conservation negative messages. You know, we're constantly harping about the doom and gloom of climate change and habitat destruction and overexploitation and on and on and on. And the audience is just getting turned off, or, you know, a lot of the audience. And so one of the things I really like about what you're doing here, it's very much a positive benefit of nature. It has a really clear message, which is we need more nature for, you know, as a more social thing. And I guess the only other thing I was just going to mention was that you're obviously talking a lot about health benefits, but I would think there would also be physical and physiological benefits due to better water, air, you know, the air quality differences between a city and a forest are incredible in terms of the amount of micropollutants and things that are really bad for you, as well as heat and stress and all those other things that you shade and all that you know about. Yeah. But I just think you got a lot. Yeah, I can see why. You said a lot of people are working on this right now.
Yeah,
so,
I mean,
yeah, I can see why. It's a lot of
nature
money.
is definitely
it's a big issue. It's got a lot of
getting
implications.
contested.
Yeah, for sure.
And you know, just to comment on this, you're right, and I think there's a lot more work on the physical and physiological. You know, you'll find people putting electrodes and doing all these blood tests and things. So it's, I think, a lot more work on rather than the actual the mental well-being and trying to separate the other things, you know, which again we haven't done, but I would love to do more of that. Thank you.
All right. Oh, sorry. One more question. Okay. About to say last chance.
Last chance.
Health counsellor. I was just thinking, mental well-being, I can understand accessing parks, going for a run in nature. I'm thinking of the people I've worked with that have got mentally ill, medication, trying to access things, danger of them being out by themselves, or what they're going to do in the actual talking, mental health, or mental well-being. But I'm not sure what we can give them in there. It's not that I wouldn't, you know, that I don't actually have a session in the ocean, trying to role model accessing being out in fresh air, getting out of the house, which is a huge thing, just getting out of the house. So to get into a national park, I'm not sure how you're doing that.
I think, you know, it's a very important comment. It's kind of got a multiple part answer, which is, you know, I totally agree with you. And my idea is kind of anything is good. You know, it doesn't have to be a national park, even though that's the research we've done. it doesn't have to be a national park. We're trying to get more information on kind of in between. So first of all, but it's exactly an accessibility problem. You know, when you talk about disability, or health issues, people think of physical disability or whatever, but they don't think of that. They don't think of some people cannot, you know, leave their house easily. They have these barriers that we don't have a solution for. So I think it's about trying to think of new ways, you know, and there's some work on these things, you know, that are ongoing, nature therapy. But I fully agree with you. Like, we don't have a solution to this. There's plenty of people that can't even do that, you know, whether it's a national park or whatever, and we don't have a mechanism to help them. There is no Medicare code for this. In fact, my opinion, and socially it's fact-based, the NDIS actually subsidizing some of this because there are NDIS funded programs for people with disability, including mental illness and neurodiversity, to go into national parks. So there's very small programs, they're very grassroots. But so the NDIS is actually the only government thing that is funding this in Australia. But there's lots of interest, you know, GPs want to do it, and let's think about something new, you know, we haven't designed it yet. Or maybe somebody else has, but not in Australia. Sorry. Quick question. Feel free to go another
Just on that, I'm really interested in urban green spaces, and I'm thinking perhaps that's where, you know, the best place to start is at a small scale that's closer to the denser populations, because something is better than nothing, surely. And as we're, as you know, if we can provide outdoor green spaces, that we have to take this on into consideration as well. So with trees, or if not shading, where these benefits can be reaped, I think that's a good place to start.
Yeah, but also that process that gets people there, because there are some barriers that even if it is there, people don't even think of going, or they don't have the capacity to do it. So it's about even more than that, you know, like bridging that gap, getting people that right now cannot go to actually use green space. Not even national parks, doesn't have to be a national park. Yeah.
That's such a good comment, because, you know, the world is becoming so urbanized.
Yeah.
And we see in many countries, not so much in Africa, but everywhere else just about, people are moving into cities. There's still growth in rural areas, but boy, oh boy, cities everywhere are exploding. And this whole issue of green spaces and everything, how do we make cities livable? We're going to have more mega cities than we know what to do with for too long.
Yep.
Anyway, look, it's a shame to have to sort of tamp down this conversation, but we're out of time, folks. So
Did not give
could
you
we
enough time for
please
questions.
thank Ali here for coming up and giving us a
Thank you.
really